So in this vlog, I'm going to cover other religions that believe in the Old Testament but reject Jesus as the Messiah. I've always been kind of fascinated about how like other religions could accept the Old Testament and then reject like the prophesized Messiah from the book of Isaiah. So people are not familiar with the book of Isaiah. So the book of Isaiah is the prophesied. It talks about Jesus, dying for our sins, and it goes in a little bit of detail. It says that he's going to be from Bethlehem, and it even goes as far as to say that he's going to be speared, and the world's going to hate him. So it's telling us that we will get someone who dies for our sins in the future. So so Islam and Judaism, from what I understand, they believe in the Old Testament but reject Jesus as a Messiah. I think that the Torah. I think that the Judaism is based off the Torah and some other scriptures I'm not exactly familiar with, but in the Torah is based off the Old Testament, and it has like some other scriptures involved too that I don't really know a whole lot about. So from what I understand, during the time of Christ, the Jews thought that their Messiah was going to be someone who was like a Julius Caesar, who was going to take over the government, give them what they want because they've been persecuted and all this stuff. And Jesus' goal was spiritual. It wasn't, material. Like, he wasn't here to like be the next Caesar. But I think that's what that's what they expected. So I just want to say that I'm not sure about this. I honestly don't know much of anything about Judaism, to be honest. I mean, I know the Old Testament. So if they believe that, when Jesus comes along and he's not doing that, they would just be like, well, you're not the Messiah. So I think that a lot of the confusions comes from the first passage in Isaiah that talks about the Messiah, and it's saying that the Messiah is going to have the government on his shoulders. And maybe they interpreted that as saying that the Messiah is going to control the government. But it doesn't mean that at all. And to kind of give us a reference of what it means, if I were to say that I have the world on my shoulders, no one would think that was a positive. Like, that doesn't mean anything positive. It means that the world is a burden and I'm carrying it, and it's like it's a negative thing. Like, it's not a positive thing to say you have something on your shoulders. That's not meant to be positive. We don't use that positively, and it wasn't really meant to be positive. So that's why it was used. So that passage is saying that the government is going to be weighing down on him. So just think about it like the way you would think about it if I said, instead of the government on his shoulders, I said Jesus is going to have the whole entire world on his shoulders. You would understand that immediately. You'd say, wow, the world is going to be on his shoulder. That's terrible. And to back this claim up, every other part of Isaiah that talks about the Messiah is talking about negative things happening to him. So if he was going to be the person who took over and was ruling the government, why is all this bad stuff happening to him? So that part goes along with everything else, the whole narrative from Isaiah about persecution, being hated, having the world on his, well, not the world, but the government on his shoulders. So all that fits. And I think that the Jews at that time, you have to understand the mindset of the Jews at that time. So the Jews at that time rejected Christ, and then that message, or their rejection of Christ, carried on through Judaism, through generation to generation to generation. So they were like, once their people, their Pharisees had discredited them in their minds, it lived on through Judaism. And I don't really understand the Muslims at all, because I'm thinking if the Muslims accept the Old Testament, I just cannot understand why they don't think Jesus is the Messiah. But it might have something to do with this. They might have reasons that are very similar to the reasons that the Jews have for not accepting him. I have no idea. But I just like to remind people that the book of Isaiah talks about Jesus being the Messiah, and that's Old Testament. So you have to just accept that because it talks about that and it's in the Old Testament. So there you go. Like, he's from Bethlehem, and it even went as far as saying he got speared. I mean, wow. I mean, come on. He's from Bethlehem, and all that bad stuff happens to him, and it literally mentions being speared. So, how much more accurate could it possibly be? So, for Christians, so as a Christian, I will sit back and be looking at Judaism and Islam and wondering how they could reject Christ as the Messiah and say that they believe in the Old Testament. I mean, they would just basically have to reject the Old Testament too, because it just doesn't make sense for them to reject Jesus when basically the Bible's saying that Jesus is the Messiah. The Old Testament said that. So I don't really know why they would do that. I just don't know why they would do that. That's why I would think to myself, well, you would have like other religions and then you have Christianity. Like you would have other religions that aren't affiliated with the Bible at all, and then you have Christianity. Because if the people from like if the Jews and the Muslims are saying that they believe in the Old Testament, but they don't accept Jesus as the Son of God and the Messiah, and it's like, well, I don't know, like maybe, okay, so that passage doesn't directly say he's the Son of God, but it infers that. It says that he will be a sacrifice for sin, so he's going to be the sacrifice that God gives us for sin, and that God was happy to do that as an expression of love for us. So everything about that makes sense if you accept that Jesus is the Messiah. So we get that Messiah. So back at that time, that was Jesus was the person prophesied to do what what the Bible said he would do, and be the sacrificial lamb for sin. And all that makes sense. What doesn't make sense is other religions who are say, we believe in the God of Israel and we accept him as our God, but we don't accept his son, or his sacrifice for sin in the Messiah. So that part I thought was interesting. I didn't want to be negative with this, and I understand that people are really sensitive when it comes to their religion, their faith-based system. So I think that this is about as gently as I can put it. But I mean, I can't tell people what to believe. I'm just saying that it's in the book of Isaiah. So like, if you don't want to believe, if you want to be like a Hindu or a Buddhist, then I guess you could do that. But it's kind of hard for you to say that Jesus is the Messiah and then just say, well, Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, what was written about the Messiah and Jesus being a perfect fit for that, we're just going to reject that. So even back at that time, well, they said that their person, their Messiah, was going to take over the government, but he never came. So like, if they said that it wasn't Jesus, then they never got one. So I'm thinking, well, okay, so you don't believe it was Jesus, so you never got anybody because no one did that for you. So that doesn't make sense in itself. He's the only person you have. Like, they would have to say that they just never got one. So either they say they never got one who was going to liberate them the way they thought that he would back at that time, or that Jesus was the one. And a lot of it was it's just like how this system works, where it's always political. Going back thousands of years, they wanted to be on good terms with Caesar. They wanted to be on good terms with the world. And they put the world and they put these leaders of the world before God. That's how I saw it back then. They were interested in making sure that the Caesar, the Romans liked them. The Romans kept them in power. They wanted to please the Romans. They wanted to do what the Romans wanted. They were of the world. and they rejected their Messiah so that they could be on good terms with the world. That's why they didn't really want to accept him. They wanted the Romans to think they're loyal. They want to be a part of this system. And that is going against God, because the people who put God first accepted that Jesus was the Messiah. And the people who wanted to make sure that everybody liked them. And we get that now. We get that now with all this PC nonsense. This PC nonsense is exactly the same sort of stuff that had them rejecting Christ as the Messiah. You know, because PC is all, naughty, bad. Like, okay, well, you can't do this. You can't offend anybody. You can't say anything like this. But even if it's in the Bible, even if it's the truth, you have to be pleased. You have to please everybody. They wanted to please Caesar. They wanted to please the Romans and please people. They had this people-pleasing attitude. And then it was about the money. And then there was money involved. So all that worldliness got involved. And it's like that even now. If you think about it, it's like that now. So with him being the perfect fit, you would think that anybody with a mind would just be like, obviously he's the Messiah. Obviously, because he's the perfect fit for it. It was prophesized. And here he is. Everything worked. So like for us, we would be the people who are brave enough to just admit the truth and allow the world to hate us for that. These other people though, and I don't know how many of them are persecuted, to be honest. Like, I know I'm persecuted, but I'm just saying, like, how persecuted could they be? They're so rich. So many of these people. And like, they're doing so well. And I'm thinking, well, I don't know. There's a lot of questions about that. But yeah, I just figured I'd put that out there because I think people should hear another perspective. So with that said, let me go ahead and close.